I've got about 20, busting up to 100 or 1,000. Mostly they're the films of the 30s, mostly films I grew up with. If somebody says to me, oh, I've got that on 16, I say, well, we don't talk about bootlace, we talk about film. Film is 35 and upwards. One day, when I got to Shepherd's Bush and I hadn't got the tins covered, and the old ticket collector said, "Here, you've got a film there, you can't travel down the underground with a film." I'd been sacked from every place I've ever worked in my life, except for the army, and I said they weren't allowed to sack me. We shared the newsreel, and I remember once dropping it out to the back of my bike and running over it, and sort of say, when I got it on the screen, saying, you know, it was too new a print. I love to see the light coming from the porthole. As Keats said, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. To say you've seen a film once, I mean, to my joy, I can see them so many times, I never get tired. I was born in 21, November the 4th, the day before Guy Fawkes Day. It all started, really, as a boy. I was very interested in collecting film myself, and I started by having a baby projector. But one of the things that gave me what we could call a kickstart was when I went to my old school, Latimer Upper School, and they had a night where the pupils of the school were showing anything, any hobbies. And one pupil brought a reel of film. And I looked at that, I picked it up, and even to this day, I mean, that must have been 1934 or so in the school. Even to this day, I can remember that scene as though it was yesterday. I picked this reel of film up, I looked at it, and I was sunk. Then, of course, I found you could buy scraps in tins, and then I went on from there, and, you know, started with that and built up. Uncle Will, he told me all about showing the films to the soldiers in the First World War, and how he, in a very naughty way, used to come up to Wardour Street to buy new films for them, and because it was cheaper to buy just titles, he bought some titles and stuck them on the Chaplin films and tried to kid the soldiers that they hadn't seen this one. Eventually, he told me that his cinema was closed because they hadn't got enough fire exits. But he told me, I think he must have really sowed the seeds in me of the, you know, increased my great liking for the old cinemas. But he came to me afterwards and he saw some films of mine, and he particularly liked the ones, the colours fading on them now, a couple of drummer films. He thought the colour was just beautiful on them. One of the first times when I was taken to South Kensington, and it was a cinema where I've never forgotten it because they were showing films all about operations, and I'd had too much pork to eat for lunch, and I was sick over the sides of the seats there. And one of the other earliest I remember going to, when I saw a Bonzo cartoon that was a bit naughty because the sausages were coming out of his backside and they were sort of chopping them off and picking them up and that. I remember that as well. With feature films, one of the first was Trader Horn with Harry Carey in 1931.
They are willing to trade their lives to find a girl. The beautiful white goddess of paganism, trained in the rites of cruelty and torture, ruling savage races in the thrall of superstition and witchcraft.
My dad started to take me to the Palace Cinema in Hammersmith, where they had no end of Buck Jones films, which I loved.
If any of the rest of you cowhands think I cheated in that card game, step right up.
I can always remember coming home from the cinema and Mother terribly disapproving about it, saying, "Harry, how dare you take your boy to this terrible cinema with the germs in it? Must be absolutely awful." And my dad, being very crafty, has got a bit of my cunning, or maybe I've got a bit of his. Dad said, "Well, it was a very good film, and the villain was a dirty skunk. You wanted to throttle him." But he said at least he made you really feel how good he was and that. So he managed to sort of turn it from the, about the perils of going to this local flea pit, which it was, to the fact of the good and the bad. It was one day when my dad and I were in the Commodore at Hammersmith, and a slide flashed on the screen, "Will Dr. Gillespie please go to see the manager?" So Dad said, "I'll go and see what he wants, and then I'll come back and talk to you." And Dad went to see him, and he came back to us. He said, "The blasted ceiling in my surgery's fallen down, and I've got to go and attend to it. Now you lads, you stay here and watch them." I started to get interested, I can't know quite how, in going to the Stoll Picture Theatre in Kingsway, and I was absolutely hooked. And my mother used to give me a pile of sandwiches, the dinner marked D and the tea marked T. I'd go in and hear the organ playing at the start, and then it would come on, and they used to show a double bill, something like 100 Men and a Girl and Ruggles of Redgap.
Oh no. Always bring the pot to the kettle, never bring the kettle to the pot.
Well, listen, Colonel, I've been making tea for longer than I can remember.
Let's get into difficulties about this. But you must listen to an Englishman about tea. If it were coffee, I should be your pupil. But we're making tea, and when making tea, always bring the pot to the kettle and never bring the kettle to the pot.
And on there are slips or double folders, which they put in boxes outside the cinema. They used to say the finest two films in London, and they did. Well, they were. They very seldom showed the double bill as would be shown in Gaumont or Odeon's. They just picked the two very best. The presentation was wonderful. They had a magnascopic screen. Admittedly, they had to black out for a minute on it, but all the highlights for films like The Great Waltz, they used to show them with that coming on, and I just loved it. So going to this film, 100 Men and a Girl, Deanna Durbin, as I say, I became a great fan of hers, and used to sit round and see the whole show for 6 hours. The times when my shows were more or less in their element was before video, or video might have been slowly coming in, but mostly they were of film. And I had a fairly big crew of people who came to them fairly regularly, and so it was quite an event putting on a show once a week.
Hello there. Hello. You're all here now. Friday night is music night.
I only managed to have one projector, so we had to have a break in between.
Outside, so we're it's nice and warm in here.
And we used to probably show two features, a short or shorts and a main feature, and we'd have a tea break in the middle of the show. Now, it was made by Gaumont British, and because it was a GB instructional film and they didn't want to have any problems with showing it to audiences with far, they managed to get an early form of safety film, so that the print has remained with me, and I almost think of having it put in my casket when I go upstairs. Anyway, it's a film which is all about how sound works, and it's beautifully illustrated. It's also got a very lovely little song called You Ought to See Sally on Sunday, which comes into the middle of it, and you get everybody on the set working away.
You might pass her by on a Monday when her long weary workday is through, but you ought to see Sally on Sunday. One day her dreams come true.
I came to Pordenone, I got off the railway station, we walked down the road and we came to the Verdi and we sort of signed in for the films. And I just loved those films in the early days. Lovely coloured shorts at the start at 9 o'clock. It was just a lovely time, I mean, having chats and laughs in the evening and then thinking of what the next day's programme would be and coming back down in. It was just wonderful. Hell's Heroes. It was a film which I saw in Pordenone, and it was in the days when the sight was perfectly okay, and I was very moved by it because it had a wonderful establishment shots at the start, which is very, I think, very important. And you're very brief, but you just got the idea of these outlaws being in the town. At the time, of course, you didn't know they were outlaws. They were just three strangers who rode into a town, but they were planning to ride back again whilst some festival was on elsewhere and rob the bank. And the other part of the film, I suppose I remember greatly, was the ending, which sticks faithfully to the book. It's where the three outlaws, in the end, although one of them has been greatly against it, but he has a change of heart, they take the baby into the town, and by doing that they save its life. Because they found a lady dying in a caravan in the desert, and they just can't feel they can desert it, and they must look after it. But and of course in Pordenone it was wonderfully done because they had a choir all singing as the last one who'd drunk the poison water to get enough strength to take the baby into town. As he got into the town and into the church, he managed to take the baby in before he died. had a beautiful tinted copy of Shoes, which is a Lois Faber film, and the English version was just the most beautifully tinted. Towards the end, I remember so well, where they showed 3 different scenes of how the chap would have been had his life changed. How he'd have been if he'd have just been a humble painter, a house painter, just painting houses, or how he'd have been if he'd have been a richer man. And they showed these 3 different sort of scenes about his life as they'd have been, and it was just fantastic film. Way Down East was one of the greatest of all films, I feel. It'll always remain in my memory. It was the scene of Lillian Gish sitting with the baby, and the baby dies in her arms at night. The very first projector I had, I bought at a shop, Goldhawk Road. And in those days, they were selling toy projectors. And I bought one of these toy projectors, and it had in the back of it a lantern, had a 60-watt lamp in it, and I had filmed from it. But it only had 250-foot capacity, so I could only show little bits, but I'd got the bug by then. I was rushing up to Chiswick, and I found a shop up there that was selling a lot of films they'd got from a chap who'd illegally probably sent them out from Denham Studios, and I started collecting, and then I was gradually getting up to the big stuff. Leytonstone had a film called Filmaries, and there were these 2 youngish men, about 30 or so each, and they'd got a tremendous collection of silent film and a few sounds, and obviously they'd been to the film strippers and they'd done deals with them. But you never saw such plunder in the silent films. God, I remember one of the first seeing the Pathés of the First World War, beautiful tinted prints, all beautiful quality. And so anyway, I bought all I could. And I can remember what I called the glib man showing me the films, and as he was showing me them, he was smoking a cigarette. So he was pulling the old nitrate out of its tin. You'd pay anything from about 6p or a shilling to about 3 and 6 for a whacking roller, which seemed huge to me, about 300 feet. And I had a wonderful one called His Honour Redeemed, with Tezuri Aoki and Sesu Hayakawa, and also a chap called Lou Tellegen. And I always remember a subtitle on that film. He raises his hand up and he said, "If you harm one hair of this girl's head, England will visit you with a punishment more terrible than you can conceive." And I've never forgotten that subtitle.
How many films did you have at that time?
I would think about 10 or 12 features. We went up to a place, Fortis Green, and there was a fellow, I think his name was C.W. Sparks, and Mr. Rockall and I used to scan the Exchange and Mart every week for film and that, and he said, "Oh, there's a notice here, David," or one of us saw it, 35mm film for sale, 6 reels for £3, or something about £2 a reel, or I forget the exact prices, but they were giveaway prices. So we go up there one freezing winter's day, but being younger I was all for it. And in this 2 huge barrels, rather like the barrels that Stan and Ollie get into in one of their 2-reelers, in these 2 huge barrels were all these blocks of film, and they were blocks because with the old cold and the ice on them. And it was a pick and mix show. You just put your hand in and pull them out, and you tried to get a complete film. And we managed to get one film complete. They had one that would interest people of early film. It was the 1930s version of The Squeaker. And I had 5 reels of Corsair, which I've never got the 8 complete, where I've seen it in the cinema. Chester Morris, and the only time she took a different name, Thelma Todd took the name of Alison Lloyd in it.
Interested in the scenery?
You won't get away with that when you grow up.
With what?
Talking with your mouth full. It isn't done.
I do it.
You always do what you want, don't you?
I always know what I want, and usually get it.
I remember one day when I got to Shepherd's Bush, and evidently I'd been in my usual rush and I hadn't got the tins covered, and the old ticket collector or someone on guard said, "Here, you've got a film there, you can't have travel down the underground with a film."
Here, you can't bring those there in a public vehicle. They're films, ain't they?
Yes.
Then they're flammable. Go on, off, big boy.
But I've got to get to Piccadilly. Can't I leave them out here on the platform or somewhere?
So I had to go by bus up to Notting Hill Gate perhaps and get on the thing later. I can't remember how I got on, but I always remember that.
Thank you.
I got hold of one, I think it was around New York. It was all beautiful colour and that, but I was short of money, so I thought, well, it's rather long shot, so I can cut it down. So I went right through it and I chopped it into half, made another copy and took it back to offer it to them. And Jim said, "I'll take it this time, but don't do it again, sir." I don't blame him. But they had some lovely ones. I remember one called the Ridge Roamers, and lovely tinted shorts. And then, but on the Lauren Hardy, I'd been through and bought my quota and all the rest, and I was just packing up when on the desk I suddenly picked up a trailer for Lauren Hardy, Fraternally Yours. Oh, my eyes blinked. And I said, "This one's in 2 parts. Oh, it's been broken, sir." I said, "Do you want it?" And I said, "I'd love it." He said, "Well, how much you got?" He said, "You still got your rail fare?" He said, you sure you got your fare?" Because he said, "We don't want you to get caught out." No, I said, "I'm all right." And I think he said, "Oh, give us a shilling or something." You know, he was so kind.
We will now take the oath.
I always needed a house that had got like the one here, at least 2 rooms so you could have a projector sealed off and a room with the screen in the middle. So that was the paramount with searching for houses. And I had excellent lenses. They were British ones, and they were very good. And they filled the whole of this 6-foot screen. And so in the end, I decided no, I'd go for the setup, which is similar to what I had then. It was a bit larger then because the far made the sort of curtaining and the thing smaller.
On CD-ROM.
Hello there. Hi. Hello there. Oh, good.
Hello. Hello there. Hello. Can I get you some wine? Go on.
You're in time for the feature, apparently, so that's amazing.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be a newsreel has been laced up. And one day when I was running the Paramount newsreel, which we also shared between the 2 theatres, I had a thing on the back of my bike and I hadn't probably got it strapped on correctly, and it fell down and I ran over the newsreel. But when I got it back to the cinema, I was too scared to admit that I'd done the damage. So I said, "Oh dear, they must have sent us a faulty copy from the lab." So we had to get it changed. So that was one introduction to Paramount newsreels. Before the war, I'd met with Freddie Wilkinson, who was a lovely, lovely man. We used to call him Bandy, because although he hadn't got a bad leg, he did, I think, walk with a limp, and you know what children are, would do that. But he was a lovely man, and he wrote me the finest testimonial I've ever had in my life, which I can all remember still to this day, coupled with the one I got when I started school teaching from one of the headmasters there, who wrote me the worst testimonial I've ever had. Anyway, Bandy, or Freddie Wilkinson, wrote a very nice thing for me. He wrote to London Films and all the other big concerns of the day, and he said, knowing the industry as I do, I said, I've tried to dissuade David. His one great passion is the cinema. I've tried to dissuade him from following in the course, but he's determined to do so, and I admire his spirit. And he said, he'd been on the British Films Council, and he'd worked on sort of, you know, quite a lot of film, you know, film viewings and things. So he helped me to get well, he helped me with letters, but of course the letters I got from London Films and all the others were all down-putters, saying that in this, with the war starting, we're not taking in any more staff on, and the only thing we could recommend is that Mr. Gillespie goes down to Pinewood and sees Terry Trench, who's working down there, and he might be able to help get him into films at all. So I did go down and saw Terry Trench at Pinewood, but Terry Trench said to me, well, I'm sorry, David. He said, the only thing we could offer you would be a sort of tea boy, and that would be documentaries. Well, like a lot of young people, I sort of was a bit sniffy, as my friend Jeffrey would say about documentaries. And I said, well, I really want to work in feature films. And of course, I had my head full of things like the feature films man, who was the MGM film effects man, Slavko Vorkapich. I mean, with a name like that, you couldn't go wrong. I got into the Walpole Ealing. I went to see a very nice fellow called Dick Hendry, and his wife said to me, she was very pleased when I said, good morning, could I see your mother? Well, his wife was very sort of pleased at me taking and my sight was all right then, but she was very, Dick was about 28, Dick Hendry, and he worked at the Walpole Ealing, and we had marvellous fun there. I just loved it there.
Do these things work?
Well, yes, I think so.
The projectionist? Mr. Quill.
The duties there as a fifth operator was to rewind the program and to do various cleaning jobs in the day. But with my ability, sight was okay, but with my very poor ability at heights and that, I didn't find it, I could get up ladders and clean the glasses. In one of the jobs was cleaning the glasses in all the lamps in the place and all that. So they put me on more on ground duties, cleaning out the gas jets and going around them, and other jobs in the more rewinding the whole program, getting that all ready, and of course the non-sync, because there the non-sync, which is the thing where they play the records. I mean, you'd come into the cinema, there'd be an old pay box, almost rather like the one in the smallest show on earth.
There you are, my boy.
And then you pass through some lovely old glass doors, and then you get into the place where the steps were. And you'd come upstairs. The downstairs was the cheap part. Then you'd come up the stairs about 6 or 8 steps, and then you'd turn a hand, you'd get a little lock on a door, and you'd go in there. That was the non-sync room, where they had the 2 tables for the records, and 2 huge faders to turn them, so you could play one record, turn it down, and then switch up and play the other record. I think it was Cyril Belcher, and he was the fourth operator, and I was the fifth. And on my first day there, Cyril Belcher was sort of showing me the ropes and that, and he showed me all the threading up on the simplex. Unfortunately, I'd been trained on the ones with the front drive at the cinema in Notting Hill Gate, and just through bad luck and what you have it, on the actual show, I laced up parts 3 and 4 of the feature, and I made a Mikado it was, and I made a mistake, and I laced it round the way I would have done at Notting Hill Gate. And it was just a total mistake, but I didn't want to be cruel to... So anyway, Cyril checked it. He said, "Oh, David, you're getting the loops great. You're great. That's fine. Okay." So the chief, of course, has to come and change over from part 1 and 2 to 3 and 4 on the Monday evening for the last show of the evening. And blow me down, on the screen comes a lovely soundtrack and all the rest.
Another insult, and I think a light one.
Now, I wanted to take the blame. I said, "I'm awfully sorry, I didn't mean it's just..." And they said, "No, Cyril should have checked it properly," and he got most of the blame. But they didn't sack him, I'm glad to say, but I've never forgotten that. But I never liked the Odeon Northfields. I always liked the Walpole more, because I felt the Odeon Northfields was a tin can place with very poor, you know, what's the names, you could hear every sound in the box because it was only little sort of walls, whereas the Walpole had been built as a real cinema. And actually, I tell a lie, it was built as a skating rink, but it just happened by the great of luck, all the beams across happened to work, that they got the sound very, very good. The sound was excellent there. The film was called Idiot's Delight, and we were told, unfortunately, due to problems, we've only got one copy. So we're sending it to you, and you're going to have to arrange your showing times through the day so that you can, we hope to get you another one on Tuesday, but for Monday, or whenever the first, it'll be Monday, first day of showing, I'm sorry, but you've just got to change. And I can still remember Ron Pask, who was the chief projectionist at the Odeon, dancing on this outside on the roof, screaming down, "We've already had 2 bloody shutdowns. Come on, you effers, get up the bloody stairs with the effing print," you know. It was all blue language with the operators. I was feeling in a bit of a bolshy mood, and we were showing this film, and I did a naughty thing really with the old thing. There was a sequence in it where they were taking the fun out of the Germans who they'd captured and brought into this, I think it was submarine anyway, in this shot, and they were saying, Heil Hitler, the Germans were saying, and the English comedian said, "Heil my Fanny," and I put the fader up to full volume for the Heil Hitler, and I downed it down as though they were frightened and whispering, "The Heil me Fanny." So I should have probably got shot at dawn for that.
Heil Hitler! Heil my Fanny!
I learnt that when the film came to the end, you had on the front of this non-sync place, you had 2 sort of like barn doors you could open. And if I liked a film and wanted to flog it, I used to lean out of that, and I used to go like that, and that would set the whole audience up. So I learnt that fairly young in my life there. I remember coming down to be interviewed for the army, and there was a dear old chap, I bless him now, at Hounslow, and he looked at me and he said, "I don't think you're quite the infantry type." So I thought, well, that's good. I sort of shuffled my old glasses around me and tried to look weak. I was supposed to go to Singapore, But on the middle of the night, the hut captain came out to us. It was in Wilmslow near Manchester. And he said, David, he said, we've just had the news on the radio, whatever. Singapore has fallen. So all leave is cancelled to there. You won't be being sent there. You're going to be sent to the Faroe Islands. So I didn't know where the hell the Faroe Islands were. I thought it was Egypt, because the Faroes and Egypt being that. So in the end, that happened. My mind was on cinemas all the time, and I was desperately trying. I was trying it on, and I was saying to them, look, I wear glasses. I can't be well enough to, to be even out here. I should be, projectionist and all the rest of it. But it took a long while. But after persisting a long while, they finally said to me, you can go across to the main island, and the capital is a place called Tórshavn. The projectionist is Gordon Minton. So I went down there and I saw Gordon. He was in the RASC, and he said to me, well, David, he said, I'll take you into the cinema. He said, the Faroese have let us borrow and use this cinema, and it's called Sjónleika húsið, which is the only bit I've ever remembered hardly of Danish. It means the house of the moving shadows. And he said, in that we are screening films for them, for the troops. And he said, you can come as my sort of assistant and all the rest of it. So, of course, I loved that. But as well as that, in the town, or whatever you call it, small village, well, large village, small town of Tórshavn, there was a cinema there in which they had a Zycon projector and a marvellous projectionist, a damn sight better than I ever was. And I mucked up his showing, but he was so good-natured, he never grumbled when I did one night. But they had a whole lot of prints stored in a cabinet, including Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and I'll never forget the first one they showed. It was a film called Viennese Nights, and that was just like heaven to see an American film with lovely music and Technicolor print. And they had quite a few British films there which had come across. And of course, being only the one projector, they lace up 3,000 feet, they'd run the 3 reels through, and then they'd put the lights up, have a break. We go and have a drink of the old, what's the names in the bar, and a chat, and then we come back and see part 2. So it was very civilised screening and very nice, lovely. I've never forgotten those wonderful days.
Turn left, 180 degrees. Radio fleet. Hit it below.
Freddie Brattle was one of the chaps in the laundrette, and we chatted about things, and Freddie said to me, we went down one day to Pinewood. I was having a drink in the bar. Peter Lorre came in, and he said, I came up to him and I said, excuse me, Mr. Lorre. He said, I recognise you, and I'd love to have a chat with you. And Peter Lorre said, well, go ahead. What do you want to talk about? And he said, well, I said to him, well, look, he said, all those Mr. Moto films, he said, I'm interested myself greatly in jiu-jitsu. He said, I love those films. He said, I wondered, would you mind, he said, I don't think it's a cheek, but would you mind if we had a couple of throws in the gym, if we went in the gym and we just did a bit of jiu-jitsu and a couple of throws? And Peter Lorre said, okay, son, okay, old chap, come on in, we'll do it. And he said, at the first throw, Freddie Brattle threw him. Peter Lorre got up and shook hands, and he said, it's a champagne. He said, my extra does the tough work now for me. He said it so. But I felt what a wonderful man. Not putting on the big old bluff and all about him, but so I've loved Peter Lorre ever since for that. I'm back off leave, Mrs. Arthur. Can I see my collection, which was in a coal bin in her garden in Chiswick? And she said, I've very bad news for you, David. Either a German bomb got it, or some children threw a match in, and it's all destroyed. But everything has gone, except on a film you had with metal sprockets round it. Because they won't burn, they haven't burnt. But everything else has gone. So come over and look by all means, and we'll talk about things. So I went over and saw her, and so I said, well, oh dear, that's it, and I'll have to start again. Chief air raids, I remember, was when I was in Antwerp, and then the flying bombs were coming over. I remember sitting there and we were watching, I think it was Fifth Avenue Girl with Ginger Rogers, and they stopped the film, put the lights up and said, the flying bombs are coming down. If you feel you'd be more secure to go home or out in the street rather than remain in the cinema, the film will continue in 5 minutes or so, but we'll give you time to evacuate. And I thought, well, I'd rather die with Ginger Rogers than be blasted to bits in the street by a damn flying bomb.
Hinter den Trümmern der Häuser sind Granatwerfer und Geschützstellungen eingerichtet. Von hier aus schlägt den angreifenden feindlichen Divisionen Sperrfeuer entgegen. Bei Jülich gehen deutsche Eingreifreserven zum Gegenstoß über.
We got into a place, well, near Papenburg, Oldenburg, places like that, when we'd come all the way through, seeing all this devastation all through Caen and France and everywhere. And we landed up in this place, which was going to be our billet. So we came into this place. I don't think we didn't sleep there, but it was going to be a sort of meeting place, and it had been an old cinema, it would have to be. So they said, well, the captain isn't ready to talk to you yet, so you can just walk around and we'll give a blow on the whistle or whatever when we want you to come down for a sort of a chat and an assembly. So of course I whipped upstairs to the box, and on the box were a couple, or one Ernemann and a Klang film sound head, I think, with it. So I'd got it unscrewed from its 4 screws, and I was just sort of getting the kit bag tested as to whether it would get into it, and it would probably broken me back and done me in if I had taken it. So we came downstairs, and the officer said, now gentlemen, I'd like a few words with you. First of all, he said, I've got to let you know that the penalty for looting is death. So I thought, well, I'm a bit too young for that, so I don't think I'll go for that one. Anyway, so after he'd had his spiel, I came up to the box and I screwed the old Ernemann back onto its thing, and then I saw this joiner on the table, and I thought, well, that could have dropped into my kit bag by mistake. I could have picked it up. I don't think they're going to kill me. They might cut a thumb off for stealing the joiner. So I slipped the joiner into my kit bag. But I'm not kidding you. Some of the chaps, you could have seen their vans when they had the chance, the lorries crammed with all the loot. I mean, Bernard Shaw in one of his plays says, well, when the army comes along, the housewife locks up her silver spoons. And it was very true. I mean, wherever you went, we were looting, the Germans were looting, everywhere was looting.
Well, here we are, David. We've arrived at the Cinema Museum. It's housed in what was the old Lambeth workhouse.
Yes.
I think it's got connections with Chaplin, isn't that right?
You're right, his connection with Charlie Chaplin and his mother. They both came in here as inmates of the workhouse, and they came into the room where Ron now shows his films, and that's the very room where they were separated, because women had to go upstairs or to another part, and the boys had to go to another part.
Well, the birthday boy. Hi,
Hello,
David.
Ron.
Come in.
Hello there.
And sign the book, please.
Okay.
We'll go and have a look. I've got some new stills to show you.
Oh, great. Have you got some of my films?
So, David, we'll have a look at Beloved Enemy. I know it's one of your favourites.
Well, yes,
Although
it really has been over the years.
It's about the IRA, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
I don't care so much for it as you do.
No.
I remember you once showed it to me and I fell asleep.
Oh, well, that can happen. It's very interesting to me, and one interesting thing about it is, of course, there were two versions. They shot versions with different endings. A sort of ending which I didn't feel was the best ending, but it was mostly shown that way, with a happy ending, where Brian Aherne says they can't kill an Irishman. He goes into the sort of room where they're looking after him after he's been shot, and that's what he said, and then it's a happy ending. But the ending that was more realistic to the book, to the story of Michael Collins's life on which it was based, was where he dies at the end.
David, The Challenge is another of your favourites,
Oh,
isn't it?
very much so.
And you didn't you have a print of that?
I did have a print, yes, indeed.
Yes.
I bought it for £10, and I remember the chap who sold it to me said it's not been through the hands of the amateurs, and it's very good quality, which it was. Yes, there's Louis Trenker and Joan Gardner. Robert Douglas, English actor, beautiful speaking voice. There's a wonderful line in the middle of it where Trenker comes in and he throws the axe down on the table. They're trying to get him to join the Italian party, and he doesn't want to betray his friend.
When I was risking my neck, has one of you ever given me a helping hand or a helping word? Not one. Now you want the summit reached from broil. Now you need me. Why? Because you think I can fill your pockets. I owe you nothing. None of you. I please myself. Break your own necks.
Yes,
So, David, your old Erneman.
The dear old Erneman, yes, I remember it well. I came into this projection room, and I decided I would take one of these sound heads, the clang film, and unloosen the bolts on it and put it into my kit bag. I was very naughty, really, but I salved my conscience by deciding that, well, the Germans had taken me away from my hobbies and home and everything for 5.5 years, so I was going to take something back of theirs, but of course I really wanted it because it seemed such a good thing to have with my silent projector at home.
Where did you liberate it from, David?
A place called Papenburg in Germany. There were two machines in the projection room, and so I took it off, I unscrewed it from the stand and put it in my kit bag. It's a very, very good sound head, I think, for the age and that. I got it through the customs and brought it home.
Yeah. David, this is a special evening because David's 85 today. The first item is a little old Mickey Mouse, which is damp stained, I think. I don't know how badly. I don't know if it's any good. I was going to view the whole program and pick out plums.
So everybody got a glass. So a toast to David. Happy 85th.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear David. Happy birthday to you.
And just plunge it anywhere here. Just plunge.
Whoa.
Yay!
Down.
Down.
What's the next one? What's the next one?
Thank you very much.
Well, whenever David shows up, it's the paparazzi.
You know, because Alex, as he was wheeling it out, he was saying,
Take your seats, please!
off. Anyway, nice to talk.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, David.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all your help. Bye-bye.
We'll wait down with prezzies.
I'm on camera.
Middle of the night, I left with all the things.
The departing, the minstrel boy to the war is gone.
Bye-bye.
Roll up the red carpet.
Bye-bye, Anna.
Bye-bye-bye.
I was at the Walpole Ealing for quite a long time, and then I got called up, and when I came back I went back there. There was a chap called Betts. He was the chief operator, and the second operator had been wounded overseas, and he used to have a chair when he was standing by running films on the projector, and he used to have the chair, and he called himself the Admiral, and when he was running he always used to like to run the last part of a 13-reel film, because it was only about what we used to call a pissy part. It was about 4 minutes, so he liked that because it wasn't much work, so he used to try and get onto that. It was a film with Tyrone Power, and it had tremendous crashings and that on the cymbals. But Eric was, although he was a very nice fellow, he was very lazy really, and I used to creep in to the projection room, and I used to, because we had the BTH Type C arcs, and the light used to go on the carbons, they were floating apart, you were getting a dreadful light, so I used to creep in and just turn the old handle to get the carbons together so as to restore the light. And he used to turn to me and he said, "You mustn't come on the Admiral's poop deck and destroy his light or something." I was in a bit of a bolshy mood at sometimes, and I'd put little bits of carbon in, and Dent was terribly worried lest they'd burn. And I said, well, the holders give a good light even if you do burn them. So I used to play around a bit there. We were showing a film once with a sort of pacifist sort of ending, or a nice ending, and there was the most terrible row going in the box between Eric and this fellow, and he'd accused he said, "You mustn't have this chair, Eric," he said. You mustn't sit through all the film, you must stand by the projector or something." And Eric was saying, "You bloody swine, I was wounded over in the war. You're a effing conscientious objector. How dare you talk to me like that?" And there was this lovely film with a great wedding going on, coming through the old speaker in the box, and that was compared with the great terrific row these two were having. I've never forgotten that. Walpole Ealing, where this fellow Kimball had been very well nasty to me. For instance, he wanted me to, I hardly had any lunch because we had a very long show, I think starting about 12, and he was grumbling that I hadn't left the canteen or something, and there was what my dad would have called a pipsqueak of a manager, getting about my rate about £7 a week then. And anyway, so I was in a bit of a bully mood, and I decided when the show started, if they wouldn't give me any help at all that night and wanted me to go on showing right till the end of the show, then I would be a bit tough. So I got hold of the fifth operator, who had been trained up to do changeovers and do a little bit of showing. I got him to start. I started the show, and then after a while, on a changeover, I did that, and then I said, "Well, carry on. I'll be back as soon as I can, but I'm going to have a drink. I've been all day on this machine, you know, and the blighters won't pay." So I went to the pub to have the drink, and I was knocking back my pint of really great ale. It was real beer then, and I'm not a beery man normally, but I was perhaps a bit. Anyway, suddenly the doorman came flying in the pub doors. But he's put the wrong part on. I said, "So, God." So I came rushing up to the box, and I said, "Don't touch it, don't touch it. We'll change over, we'll go on to the correct part." And he said, "We might get away with it." And we did. Nobody complained. It was such a confused and muddled old story on the film that nobody spotted it, so we got away with it. One day we were showing there, and occasionally you got very bad fogs up from the brewery, and it was a very long throw from the box. The screen looked like a postage stamp from the box, although it was an enormous screen, and so we weren't able to just see it. It just was impossible through the fog in the hall. So we had a call up from the usherettes, and we had an intercom, and the usherette rang up, and she said, "I'll call out when the first dot comes on the screen, and then you can start up." And we said, "Well, you needn't worry about the over thing, because we can see it on the machine or something. We'll do it best we can." So we had to do it that way. I got a job at Technicolor, and I was there about, I think, roughly about 11 weeks. And we had a very nice people giving us the talk about it, and all about the history of it and everything else. And they said nobody here knows the full process of this place. It's too involved and all the rest of it. But so I started and got very interested, of course. But I found the difficulty there was they worked shift work. They were magnificent payers. I mean, if you got there in the evening, 6 o'clock, it was time and a half. If you worked all night, it was double time. No questions asked, no silliness about that. So nothing wrong with that. But the trouble was that I went by not being a driver, I went by the old Green Line, and you'd arrive there. And I can tell you, some nights when I arrived there, I'd have paid the whole week's salary to go home again, because I was so tired, because it was quite tough. And as one man said to me, "David, if you want to stay on here, my advice is buy a caravan and live outside the place and then just go in," he said, because it was killing me, the sort of the 3-shift system. So that's why I gave it up in the end. I was a negative assembly operator. It was very interesting work, but some nights I was given one night the whole of Gone with the Wind to work on, sort of looking on the soundtrack for any imperfections to blot them out and all the rest of it. But we did have one chap there who was very sort of company's man, as you might say, and he used to see me coming in, and sometimes my apron might be bulging with a few little bits and pieces that had fallen onto my pocket out of the machine or somewhere. They were only junk film, but he said, you do remember, Mr. Gillespie, that there's a penalty for taking any film out of the company and all this, that and the other. I left the Technicolor, I came back, and I decided to try for teaching, and eventually I got posted to Bembridge School. Because I had done the teaching and I hadn't got the certificate, so that they said you can only teach now in private schools. The children were very nice people. Interesting man was there, was the man who wrote the music for all the Hancock films. His child was in one of the classes. But I mean, it was a school where the parents were offloading their kids. I remember once one child, they were driving away and they just threw the child off not sort of terribly hard, but they pushed him off the edge of the back of the car, not to make him go back to the school. So it was very tough on the children, especially those who hated boarding school. But I used to have to control one dormitory. It was like a Will Hay film. As fast as I'd sort of quieted them down with terrible threats and tick on the board for great punishments, so you'd hear the other one down the other end going. From there I'll give you a quiz show. Beds, they can't have beds.
Oh, the old dark half.
Good, good. I had the great privilege of having the lady show me how she made love in that film. Down at Ron's.
Gloria Stewart. Gloria Stewart.
You know, and she said, "Oh, David, I'll take you to show him how they did the scene." Well, I've waited for 57 years for this. It should be good.
Was that your finest hour?
Very nearly.
How did she explain it?
Well, there's a marvellous scene in it with her and the drunken Karloff as the mad butler and that. But she explained how they'd done the scene and also how the director, she made a terrific fuss of the director. She said he was just wonderful. She even talked about films he'd hardly done or late films that weren't perhaps so good. She was very impressed with him. When we moved here, I really got started with shows. I had a projector stand and I had the Gaumont Chrono projector. I used to call it the Chrono, but it had one advantage. It had belts on the side, which one belt would take silent film through 16 frames a second and the other belt would take sound. But the drawback to it was the terrific noise it made. Also, it was a murderous projector on bad for films. About 1946, when I came out of the army, I used to always read The Exchange and Mart, because in that you'd have advertisements for people. Sometimes the KRS would put one in to try and catch somebody by saying "for sale Chaplin in the Gold Rush" or something, or "for sale all this and heaven too," which a chap in Bristol I knew, Eddie Smith, had. They'd put in an advert to trap people to write to this address, and then the KRS would swoop. But anyway, this was a different story. Interest in films, Burt Langdon, 58 Camden Road. So I whizzed along to 58 Camden Road, met Burt and became lifelong friends. Burt was very, very much a terribly big influence on me. He was an incredible man. You've seen his pictures, I think. I mean, he had a collection of 3,000 records, and he'd known Ben Lown and B.B. Daniels, and he had an incredible history he loved silent films. He didn't like talkies really at all, but he had an incredible, history of collecting. Anyway, one night, I think I'd got hold of a film, Kathleen Mavourneen, which was an old Tiffany-style film. I was leaving Burton. We almost left till about the last tube train. Last train was about 11:45 or 12, and I got down to the station, and a policeman in the station came up. One policeman came up to me. He said, what do you got in that tin or that sack or whatever I had? Oh, I said, it's an old film. I said, he said, not a dirty film, is it? I said, no. I said, it's an old film called Kathleen Mavourneen. I said, I've just, a friend of mine has got it for me and I'm just taking it home. And he said, OK then, son, off you go. So I got away with it that time.
Wood.
This copy was in ribbons, and I said to Mr. Rockall, well, shall I take half of it and mend it, and you take half and mend it? Because this projector of his was very, very kind to bad film. So I was walking round in daylight. I'll never know to this day if he was a crook or a detective or what. But a chap crossed the road. I was just coming up Hamlet Gardens to my flat, and he crossed the road. He said, "Excuse me, sir." He said, "I wonder if you'd let me know what you've got in that bag." He said, "I'm a detective." I don't think he showed me any, but you know me, guilty of all right, so I said, "Well, it's an old film called The Mad Genius." I said, "and I've come to repair it for a friend of mine. We're going to show it. Made in 1932, and it's in very poor condition." And he must have thought, "Well, that's a nutter if I've ever seen." So I said, "Well, that's all right." So off we go.
Have you ever heard of the golem made of mud and given a human soul? Or Frankenstein, the monster created by man? Or the homunculus, the pale being, the product of science?
Harry Hodgson was another colleague of mine, and he knew Norman Kirk, and he also knew Audrey Kirk. And Harry came to me years before then, and his son had worked at Denham. Then his son was moved to Technicolor, and his son was a bit of Harry was a bit of embarrassment to his son, because Harry was always wanting to get films to show at his home. When Harry wanted stuff smuggled out of the place, he used to tip the gardener a couple of bottles of whiskey, and the chap would go up to the dump, and he'd put any of the Technicolor junk onto his wheelbarrow, and he'd stick plants on the top of it, and he'd wheel the barrow through the guards at the gate and say, "Oh, more old plants for the old rockery," or whatever, and he'd wheel it out that way, you see. So they got it out that way. But I remember when Harry had the chance of getting the film I would have loved. I've got it since Modern Times. When he had the chance of getting that, he went and took something else instead, and I thought, "Oh, dreadful. He's got some old Western instead of Modern Times." Still, it was up to him. But he did get some odd reels out of Gone with the Wind. Stan Smith used to have, he had an old Gaumont chrono in a wardrobe, and he lived up near North London, Finchley sort of way.
So was there a hole in the wardrobe to shine?
Yeah, to shine onto
like a
projection room. And he had a film I loved, Barbara Stanwyck in Shopworn, 1932, but he showed these films through the wardrobe and that, various ones, and we went up, and I remember the first time I went to see The Third Man with Bert, and although Bert didn't greatly go on sound films, even he was really sort of transfixed. We saw it in a cinema. I mean, to see that start coming on in 35mm in a beautiful print, it was just an absolute knockout. Frank's shows were the shows that he did with the old 35mm. He had this projector, you know, the Bauer. And they were very good shows, except that Frank was very lazy about repairing films. If he had a break, he'd just tear out about 20 feet and just throw it away or chuck it down.
Darling, what's happened?
Film's broken. All right, don't panic, don't panic. Don't worry.
The Frank Big Show was the show that he had where he invited the lady who was in the famous Goldwyn film One Heavenly Night. Evelyn Leigh was invited. She said, I wish my husband could have come. That was a fellow who became very big, Frank Lawton, but he's not too well and he's got a bad cold. So she brought some lady companion with her.
This promises to be quite an evening.
Yes, it's rapidly becoming something of the sort. No, I'm not ready for that yet.
Why not?
Well, it's too soon after dinner.
She told all these wonderful stories of making it. She said, I'm going to get on the phone and talk to Sam about this because he'll be so interested to hear about this screening. And she said, and John Bowles was such a lovely man, and the rest of it. And she talked about how the scene she got drenched. But the man she chiefly liked was Leon Errol. Well, he's absolutely marvellous in this. He comes down a whole row of absolutely fabulously expensive statues, and they're terribly. He sort of knocks them, and they stagger forward and then go back on their plinths. And she said his timing was absolutely wonderful. She couldn't say high enough praise for him.
Dear. There we are. There we are. Oh, that's right there. That was close. Yes.
Then Frank showed this film, and no one but Frank would have tried to get away with it, because about 8 minutes from the end it suddenly stopped and the end came on, and she looked up and said, "Frank, what's happened?" And he said, "Oh, well, I haven't got the last few feet, but you're all right, you survive and you're okay." But anyone else would have at least warned the poor lady before it started, but being Frank, he didn't.
Lily. Good night, Lily.
To be fair, of all the people in the country who probably helped the collectors more, probably not perhaps meaning to, though I hope he did, was Bob Monkhouse. Because he had his problems with films. What happened was he was up in some cinema in the Midlands, and he said he went into a manager came into a show, and Bob Monkhouse was showing to a packed audience of people, all paying about 3 and 6 or whatever, quite a lot of money in those days, to see these films. And this poor old cinema manager next door had got about 12 people in his cinema. And so he took Bob Monkhouse to court, saying that these films were stolen and that he'd no right to them, he hadn't paid the rental on them and all the rest of it. So there was a court case.
I certainly don't feel like a pirate anymore. It's terrible being a film pirate, I believe. You can't watch films with a patch over one eye and a parrot on your shoulder.
He'd been arrested over 2 years ago after police raided his home, where he has a collection of over 800 old films.
They had the wrong target. I think they have a difficult job to do, and there are right targets that they have to pursue. There are genuine film pirates. They must be prosecuted and will be prosecuted.
Of course, a lot of things in his favour were that he'd made a lot of these films, like Dentist in the Chair and all these ones, so that was a big pull in his favour. But all the same, and where it did collectors a good deal was the fact that after that, the court recognised that a film collector was a sort of valid person, providing he hadn't sort of knocked some over knocked someone on the head and stolen the films, providing they'd come to him legitimately. As in one film the Archive did on lost films recently, said somebody said to a collector, "Well, will you tell us where you got this film?" And the collector said, "No, you never ask a collector that question."
A farm building in County Galway isn't a very likely place to find a film archive. But then, in some respects, Tommy Casey isn't a very likely farmer.
Going to Tommy's place the first time was amazing. He worked on the farm all day, and in the evening, after we'd had our meal, we went out to the cinema. He had a cinema in the kitchen where he had his old Ernon projector. He used to roll down the screen in the far end of the kitchen by the windows and put the films on, and we'd go on half the night. And I used to spend the day with rewinders where you had to put little pins in on the corners to keep it going and all the rest, checking films all day, and then in the evening we had the shows. So that was it. This was the general routine. I remember sitting up all night to look at a very blue film of the Westerner. Tommy'd gone to bed then. He had piles and piles of film in the old house. He used to pick it up from the travelling showman, and they had it in enormous reels, 6,000 feet, and you'd have to break it down on this rewinder to a manageable lengths. To me, Tommy was the greatest collector the kindest man I've ever known in my life. I say that to anybody till they lug me off and tear my tongue out. I mean, he was a wonderful chap.
Tell us how you got hold of this Austrian film.
Yeah. There was a guy up near High Lever Road, a Mr. Legasic, who was a Polish fellow, and through Mr. Rockall and one or two other of my friends, we got to know him. And he told us about Polish people. You see, they used to send over German films for the Poles to entertain them when the Polish divisions were in England. And that's how some of these prints came across. To me, I've always loved the music of Johann Strauss, and of course, and Austrian operetta. And of course, this film is all the various operettas were taken. It's partly based on fact. Norman Kirk used to say, "We're missing valuables, brocketing time." Nattering away. Notice, Tony, ein Wien film. Recorded on Klang film.
Thank you. Who directed it though?
No, I'll have to think. Now this is the Schubert song. I'd carve her name on every stone and tree. I'd tell it till the river's flowing free. Thine is my heart.
Of all the films that you like most, David, what's your favourite scenes that you remember?
Well, so many different films. Thief of Baghdad, the wonderful scene where they have the singing in the background, and he comes out as the genie and stands before her, and she's so taken by him. And the rest of that story, it's just the most wonderful scene. I felt the photography was almost like a painting. It was such beautiful photography. So it is just to me an outstanding movie. My Darling Clementine, for instance, is one of the favourites, even though in some ways you could say it was ridiculous in that they go to Monument Valley, and that is miles away really in geographical distance from the town where it was supposed to be taking place. But as Ford said, if the legend is more attractive than the truth, print the legend. One of my favourite films among many was a film called Street Scene, directed by King Vidor, and the lady was Sylvia Sidney. And I remember a very tough American critic who used to be very tough on things, but she said of one other film, Sylvia Sidney came on the screen and we all fell in love with her.
It was only a few hours ago she was standing there, telling me about the chicken. I've got to go up and get my things.
Wait a minute, Rose. I want to talk to you.
What are you going to do?
Well, I really think the best thing for Willie and me would be to get out of New York. You know, like we were saying this morning.
The documentary on the mail train, this is the night mail going through and with the rabbits. W.H. Auden wrote the script for it. Night Mail it was called.
Letters of thanks, letters from banks, letters of joy from the girl and the boy, receipted bills and invitations to inspect new stock or visit relations, and applications for situations and timid lovers, declarations and gossip from all the nations, news circumstantial, news financial, letters with holiday snaps to enlarge in, letters with faces scrawled in the margin, letters from uncles, cousins and aunts, letters to Scotland from the south of France, letters of condolence to Highlands and Lowlands, notes from overseas to Hebrides, written on paper of every hue, the pink, the violet, the white and the blue.
And in my innocence, when I went to see the distributors, I said, I don't suppose you've got a battered old copy of that film, have you? And they said, no. And I said, well, I run classes to help teachers learn projection. And I said, you have got any scrap old film? Oh, he said, well, we're always having requests for this. I will give you this little lump. And so he gave me about 200 feet of something. But I certainly wasn't going to get the night mail. There's a lady who normally played quite young parts and then became quite old because she was the lady whose husband had been very tough with her, is in it. And she starts talking to Betty Davis about things about women and that. Leslie gets a bit upset about it and saying, well, don't do that or something. Anyway, they turn to Bogey to get Bogey's opinion. And Bogey spits out Leslie Howard turns for him for strength and he says, look at the Duke, he could be across the border now, but he's waiting for a girl. And Bogey spits away through his cigar through his teeth and says, I guess we're all saps where the dames is consigned, but I wouldn't mind betting he's the champion, pointing at Leslie.
All right, then let me speak for you. He could have been across the border by now and safe, but he prefers to remain here. You know why?
Why?
Because he has a rendezvous here with a girl. Isn't that true, Duke?
Yes, pal, that's it. I guess we're all a lot of saps, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was the champion.
I mean, that's a great line to me. It was just for that one line. No, it's a very, you know that, I'm probably telling you something, you know that Leslie wouldn't do it. He told Warners, unless you give me Bogey for the part, I'm not going to make it. Or he only had enough clout to get Bogey. Watching the nitrate print of The Rains Came, which happened to be a beautiful copy, absolutely. I think it was the silver in the prints. When they were good, they just glowed magnificently. There's never been anything like it. I can't compare stuff too well today because of the sight, so I don't jump too high on the bandwagon, but I have got the memory, and the memory of that was, it was just marvellous. Incredible. And there were others, but that was one that always stayed in my mind. Mailing is a very great favourite. It's a film I paid sixpence to see it out in the Enns cinema out in Normandy, and then I paid 11 and 6 to see it in the cinema in London. I mean, it's a wonderful film, that. Gertie Lawrence, when she was doing the film Rembrandt, she walked around on the set with heavy boots or shoes on, made a lot of clumping noises, and I think she had a very difficult part to play because she had to play the wife who was very ungrateful. But it's a wonderful film. I loved it. I love the description in the Film Weekly. Now, I've never forgotten it. A chap said, I went to see this film Rembrandt, and he said the painter was dying, and before the last fade out, a slide came on. I says tuppence, fourpence and sixpence. And he says that was about the worst of my adventures into cinema.
Vanity of vanities, all is vanity.
Es geht nicht mehr. Ich bin ganz deiner Meinung. Es geht nicht mehr. Na, vielleicht finden wir noch irgendwo ein ganzes Hemd für dich.
Mädchen in Uniform, Children in Uniform was a very interesting early German film made in 1931, and the acting was superb. But I do, although I wasn't so critical then, but seeing it now, luckily I saw it before the site went too much. They put in much more what shall we say, titles that reveal more of the plot. It's a wonderful film, and I loved the lady in it. One of the ladies was Dorothea Wieck, and I had again a brilliant night trailer of a film she made called Cradle Song, with a very fine actress called Evelyn Venable, who made several films around that early period, and that is one I'd love to see. The Moon and Sixpence, I still remember, was reissued by Monarch Films in 1942, and there were two prints, which as a friend of mine used to call it, leaked out to the amateurs. And I was lucky, I got the one with the end title in colour. We did a pilot screening at the NFT, and the lady in charge had to be in the box with the fireman while they showed it, and they only showed some reels, and then the projectionist said, "We've got time to show any more," so. And when it came on at the NFT, a chap sitting next to me, it was the right man to be by me, he said, "I've come all the way down from the Midlands to see this, to see all the colour." I said, "Well, you're going to see one reel of the colour, not the Technicolor, but the tinted reels, because when they go out to Tahiti, it suddenly changes from black and white, all tinted for the last 4 reels." Well, I said, "You'll see a tiny bit," but I said they haven't bothered to show the rest in colour. I borrowed that film and I gave a 16mm show to a class, and I got it from up in the Midlands, and they had a title on the end which I've never seen anywhere else, and it said, we would like to say on behalf of the Catholic League of Women's Decency that this film should not have portrayed Strickland as a hero because he was a downright degenerate man or something like that. And I've never seen that title on any other film before like that. The Channel 4 showed it and completely cut out the sequence in the caves, which was the sort of the big highlight in Technicolor of the whole film. And then later on, BBC put it on. And I went up to see the chap at the BBC, and I took up this coloured reel and so on. They agreed they would show that.
Strickland created a masterpiece, and then, in pride and contempt, he destroyed it. But in his last great painting, he achieved what he wanted. His destiny was fulfilled. His life was complete.
Where's Chick? Hey, how did you get up there? How did you get down there? Come on, Woody, here we go again. Be careful, will you? Look out for my head. You're hurting me. Be careful. Cut it out, will you? Hey, you know there's a show going on down here. We're trying our best to get you anything that you ever had in the
Hey, Louis, get that blonde out of there and concentrate on your business. A terrible way to make a living.
Hellzapoppin, well, of course, I really went over the moon about that. But one of the things I liked in it, apart from all the old gags and jokes, I liked the young couple in it, Robert Page and the girl, because I thought they sang a very nice number in it.
There's a cottage hidden in the hills by a waterfall where stardust spills and songs bloom on the windowsills. It's heaven for two.
I think there are some bits that are a wee bit too cracky now, if you know what I mean. Can't enjoy every minute of certain films again, seeing them all. But by and large, of course, it is great fun, and the whole idea was fun.
Number 1 machine in the inside. That one. Number 2 machine here. What is it? What do you got going on?
I was working, I think, in my holiday from doing the teaching to supplement the small grant they gave me for the teaching. I used to work at the Broadway Hammersmith, and we had this Emergo there one day, and I saw that in action and being worked. Emergo was when they showed a horror film, and in which they had a wound-up clockwork sort of skeleton inside of a box, and I suppose there's some pre-arranged signal from the projection room or somewhere where the door of the box opened, and this sort of skeleton walked across the audience, suspended on a wire above them. One of the great people who's helped me is Bob Gitt. He's a marvellous fellow. He's wonderful, has helped me with no end, because he's done great work. I got hold of a film called Ligong, and I told Bob Gitt about it, and he said, well, we can't spend American money on this. This is a film made out in Bali. That's nothing to do with us. And I said, Bob, Constance Bennett is in it, and her husband, the Marquis de Falaise. I said, you can't get any more American than Connie Bennett. And in the end, after a bit of push and pressure, he decided he would have it. And another man who's helped me, simply because I was very lucky that I had 2 films he wanted, is Hugh Hefner. I've never actually met the great man, but I've talked to him lots on the phone, and he wanted any films with Al Bowley in. And fortunately, I had 2 features with Al Bowley in.
And at last, when she's about to fall, don't rushing, all that will end it all. Just hold her tight, await a spot of moonlight, and leave the rest to nature.
We did a deal whereby I let Hugh Hefner have these films on high-grade video. He didn't want them on film and all the trouble of transferring them and that. So we got them done to high-grade video, and I paid for it, and then he sent me a cheque for paying for it, and he also agreed to do something for me. Well, I'd like to have had those 2 done, but more important for me was a film called Tannhauser, which was made in about 1913, and it had the man in it in the lead, James Cruise, who made very famous films afterwards. The director's name, which wasn't on the cast of the film, was Lucius Henderson. And it's a very interesting film, and it was years ahead of its time because it had a tremendous range of different colours. It had close-ups, it had dissolves. It was a brilliant film, and I went down to Heathrow and took a reel of it to show his grandson. His name, of course, was Tannhauser, and he was trying to collect all of his father's films. So he agreed to have it done for me, but he made the conditions that I would have the film sent out by the BFI and given their due. They did pay to have it sent out to be done in Washington. But there was a blinking idiot in Washington, I hope he's not a friend of anyone here, and he took about 4 months doing nothing with it except making a black and white print, which I already got a perfectly good black and white print from the archive of it. And then he said he had tried to make colour tests and he couldn't get it done, or made some excuse. And by that time, one of the middle reels was disintegrating. So when it came down to the clinch, I phoned Bob Gitt up, or he phoned me, and I said, Bob, would you be able to do the Tannhauser? And he said he would, but he said it's going to cost as much as doing those 2 features. So he said, that's all I'll be able to do, but I'll get you a copy of it, which he's done. Working at the Walpole Ealing, as it was part of the Odeon circuit, I was entitled to free tickets to go, complimentaries free, to go to the Odeon Richmond up the hill. So on my half day I went up to see Joan of Arc with Ingrid Bergman. And these tickets were in the luxury upstairs seats, and I was sitting there, and there was a large man sitting in front of me, and rather bald-headed, and I said, "Excuse me, sir," I said, "do you happen to be Gary Marsh?" He said, "I plead guilty." So I said, well, I said, I happen to be a film collector. I said, I've got one, and I've got one of your old films. I said, I bought...
Rowena, what are you doing there? Come back to the house at once.
Rowena's staying with me.
She is not.
She is. Bet you I make me fall in again.
Brian! Silence, Rowena.
Silence, Rowena. Watch me.
Will you come back to the house?
She will not.
She will if I have to drag her back by force.
You wouldn't dare. Now for it.
We'll soon see about that.
And he laughed. He said, "Oh dear," he said, "has that old thing stuck still?" I said, "Yes, it's great fun." I said, "I love it." Anyway, I said, "What do you think of this film?" Well, he said, "My honest opinion," he said, "I love her, Ingrid Bergman. She's wonderful. But in this, she looks like a horse mistress from Rodine High School." She said, "She doesn't remind me of Joan of Arc at all." He made about 100 films. Very lovely man, lovely man. Anne and Eagle phoned me up and she said, I am wanting to go to a theatre up north, and I want to do a programme on a gentleman who was very, very good to me, Ralph Reeder. She said, "I found out that I believe you have something of Ralph Reeder in the film Limelight." And I said, "I do indeed." I said, "I'm very happy to let you borrow it and make a copy of it." I sent it to Cricklewood by a taxi or whatever, and they copied it.
And they will soon show that.
Ernie was a real firebrand. Did you ever meet Ernie Clark? Oh, a lovely man. Well, he came in one day to the Odeon, and Evans, the manager, came up to him. Evans was always impeccably, smartly dressed, and he said, "Put on a good show tonight. John Mills is coming." And he said, "We always put on a good show, and he never pays for his bloody ticket. Make sure he pays for his ticket. He's a mean old creepy."
Thank you. Tell me, why were you so sure that I was a millionaire?
Well, nearly all the Americans I meet seem to be, especially the oily ones.
But one day he said, Robert Mitchum arrived at the studio, and he said, we greatly took to him. We felt he was a man who just told you as he felt. There was no big shots or anything about him, and we really liked him. But he came into the restaurant, and he said to I don't know if he said it to Olive or to Ernie, Olive's Ernie's wife. He said, "I'll play any part you like," but he said, "I'm not going to take Auntie Simmons out." So I don't know what he got about Jean Simmons, because I always thought she was a cracker. But still, there we are.
How do you do, Mr. Delacroix? I've heard such a lot about you.
How do you do?
He said to people, he said to Ernie, "I'm a right bastard," he said, and I'll tell you that right from the start. But Ernie liked him because, as I say, you knew where you were with him, Ernie said. So he really got on well with him. In my younger days, I hardly knew there was such a man as a director. It really was all film fan magazines and stars when I started. I wasn't really highbrow, but I slowly, I say, became a bit highbrow, possibly belonging to this classic film club, which used to have little jaunts down the Thames and that, and they would show specialised films, as they called them. I remember them having 1 week of French films at the Embassy, Notting Hill Gate, and there was a different one every night, and they were just wonderful. And then I gradually got to learn to like the continental films, and so I became a little bit more highbrowy on that because of them, I suppose. I came across Ruben Mamoulian when I went to the NFT, and we were seeing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the version he'd made, and when it was over, the lights came on and they asked for any questions or remarks. And one chap got up and he said, "This is the National Film Theatre, and during this film there was a showing of a part that was repeated twice." He said, "How can we have this in our National Film Theatre?" And Mamoulian said, "Well, sir," he said, "you got double value for your money."
Positively indecent.
Look where he did to me.
Your conduct was disgusting. It isn't done.
I said, "I'd like to ask a question, Mr. Mamoulian." I said, when I saw Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I read in the Film Weekly that it had been sent first to Holland, and even the Dutch, who'd got more lenient censorship than ours, said it was so very, very risque that they didn't dare show it without sort of probably thinking of trimming it. And Mamoulian said, "Never heard of it."
You went to the NFT to John Cromwell's lecture.
Oh yes, and that was all about a very great favourite film of mine. I'd waited donkey's years to see it, and the first version was the Bette Davis version of Human Bondage. And after it came over, I had a word with John Cromwell about it. And I said how pleased I was to see this, and and all the rest of it. But I said I would just say one thing about it. I was fascinated by the book, and I said in the book it says how the chap went over the bridge, and he over the Westminster Bridge or whatever bridge in London it was, and he could see Miriam, the girl he'd been in love with all his life, and he said he would never get over it and the rest of it. And I said, you didn't indicate that at all in the end of your film.
I had to be free to realize that. I had to be free to understand that all those years that I dreamed of escape, it was because I was limping through life.
Taxi, sir?
No, thank you. And because I was bound up with a person who was incredible to me. But that's all over.
And he said, oh, well, we couldn't put in every detail. And I didn't like to argue with him because of every other way. I thought the film was very interesting. But I felt that's the whole bloody point of the film, mate. To leave that out was a bit silly. But I did say it because he was a very nice chap. Dilys Powell, I loved for one sentence she made in one of her reviews. She said, the 30s films may have been very childish, very silly, but at least they had heart. And that bound me to her for that review.
We generally stayed in the same hotel. He would sleep in the morning and I would work.
Graham Greene, I very strong anti-feelings, really. I'd love to have had the guts to go to the NFT when he gave an evening of sort of talking and sort of talk back, but probably being me, I wouldn't have got it all over. Because I think that, you know, he was very, very tough on various things where he didn't have to be. So I didn't greatly go on him, but admittedly a very clever man. Paula Vesely made 4 German films, which all came to the Hampstead cinema, the Everyman. I'd seen some of them at the Classic as well. I can remember Mr. Delamere, the old manager at the Classic, being very said, it's very tedious and slow, this one. But he was looking at it as the box office thing. And, well, I think Graham Greene called her an old cart horse or something. She was very... well, she wasn't a great beauty, but she was a very interesting actress, and those 4 she did were very good films. The telecinema appealed greatly, in spite of all the good films I had seen, continental films during the war. But to come there, it was beautifully upholstered. Every seat you got a wonderful view of the screen, and they showed a very generous selection. You'd probably have about 40 minutes of one film, and then they'd have a whole feature as well.
When you say 40 minutes, do you mean an extract?
An extract, yes.
Right. So this were the best sequences?
Well, it wasn't, they weren't, as far as I remember, they weren't joggled about. You just have, like I say, 40 minutes of a start. You may think in some ways that was a bit silly, but in the end you got the flavour of it, and it was just giving you an idea. They obviously hadn't time in the running time to show 2 features. So that was very interesting. Sometimes they were battered old prints. I can remember one or two, but it was so lovely to see them up on the screen. And of course, some of those films just hadn't seen for years, like The Gold Diggers, say, of 33. But to see them again on the beautiful screen, beautiful 35mm copy they had of that, it was just wonderful. I felt just 2 splices go through, but I could tell they were okay, so I haven't stopped. But it's when you get a nick where you need to put a V patch over it. Years ago, of course, we didn't have tape, and we used to have to use film for the patches over them, and there were problems. We used to cut a V in the films, but you had to be very careful, because if it broke open, then of course the film could tear. So this is the thing you have to be thinking about all the time with film. I was down at my brother's one Christmas and I noticed on the wash basins it was like a black sort of hay. Well, not exactly a haze, like a black ring. And I thought, this can't be Joan, she wouldn't have blown back paint. So I said, I think I've got problems with the eyes. And I said, but as I'll be going home tomorrow or whenever it was, I'll get it checked up. So as soon as I got home, I got on the phone and I asked for the hospital, and they said the Charing Cross is closed for Christmas, but it's an emergency ward at the Western Eye Hospital. Went up and saw them. So they did all the tests they sort of wanted to, and then the chief optician or chief specialist took me into a room and said, I want to talk to you, Mr. Gillespie, about this. And he showed me a chart and he said, behind the eye you have like a shield, almost like a thing in the projectors, you know. Well, not a mirror exactly, it's like but he said, as you grow older, it gets weaker. And drops of acid penetrate through it and they fall on the centre of the eye, and we call that the macula, and they give it what we call macular degeneration, and and so what you're in effect now you've only got is what we call side view, you see, so you cannot see anything straight out of the eye. Now there's 2 types, there's a wet and a dry, but I've been greedy, I've got both. As far as we can tell, it was an electrical fault in the house that set the house alight, and fortunately for the fire brigade managed to get upstairs and they managed to smash their way through the tiles and get water sprayed into the sitting room. And as the fire officer said when they came here, you were lucky that you had this upturned thing on the stone parapet, because otherwise the flames could have gone downwards and have got to it much worse. So we were lucky with that, and very, very lucky that so much was preserved. It's incredible. Can't believe it.
It's the truth, Willie. But the encyclopedia. He said it didn't even mention your name.
You must be a very happy man, Mr. Freescreen.
I decided I'd have to get rid of the nitrate. And a great friend of mine and assistant took it up, and it had to go up at a certain time. It had to leave here and then go and be laid in a wayside passage, and then had to be taken up because it had to arrive at Geoghegan when they'd open the gates and let it in. And it cost me the princely sum of £1,100. But there we are. I mean, but I'm only now hoping that some of those prints they will do, because I know they're short of money, but there's some they should do, because ones like this one, The Big City, the print may be too bad now. I have got a video of it, fortunately, but in the day I bought it, at about 7 and 6 a reel, I didn't think, it's all right, it's interesting, but today it's historic, really, showing you all the London streets.
The London of the theatre is much the same. It's a little world of its own, and as it revolves pleasantly enough on its West End axis, it carries a fund of gossip that you'd seldom hear outside. People who work in the theatre talk theatre, and if you're interested, you'll always know where to find them.
The trouble is the costing and the money side of getting them printed. Now I'm hoping that they will manage to do at least some of the British ones, and that they will notify other archives of the other ones, like USA and any foreign ones.
What's been the great attraction, David, of being so devoted to films? What's the thing that drives you to being so fascinated by them?
It's very hard to put it into words. I remember dear Bert Langdon with his boy, and the little boy here, was it Mongols disease? And he used to say, "Show us the train film, Daddy, show us the train film, Dad." And Bert used to explain it's the movement that sort of interests him and that. So I just don't really know. I mean, as the old song goes, who can explain it? Who can tell you why? Fools give you reasons, wise men never try. These educational films, a few of them were on this safety stock. I've got another one somewhere called Old Sussex, and the owner couldn't spell, so he called Suckits, S-U-C-K-I-T-S. Now, just on the very top of the leader, I found a V-cut, but it's so near the white spacing, I'm going to risk that and leave that. This is the lead where you write all the details of your film on this, and I'm just going through this, and now the film is ready to take off from the spool. You take off the screw plate at the back, just give it a spin, and then you dislodge one spool from the other, which can be a bit tight. Have a bit of a struggle with this now. Oh, there it's gone. And then you pull the back of the spool off, and these are lovely spools. A friend gave them to me. And there's the film ready to go back in its can, ready for another projection. I mean, I've got great memories of the projection job, and I mean, the money wasn't good, but it didn't matter to me. I mean, I just loved it. It was good, I think, that my parents allowed me to do it, because my dad, being a doctor, might have said, "Oh, you can't do this," because his parents were tough on him and made him become a doctor when he wanted to be an actor. It strikes me, rightly or wrongly, that it's a struggle between money and love of film. That, thinking about it a lot as I do, and we all do, I think that's what it comes down to in a way. They're those people who really see it chiefly as money, what it's worth, what can we get for it. And they're the other ones who think, we've loved it, wouldn't it be nice to leave it to the next generation? There's a lovely double album of Tex Ritter. I've got several other ones on that, but it's called An American Legend, and he talks before every song he does, but at the end of it, where he talks about, you know, he sings a song where all the cowboys are in heaven, and then they suddenly shout out the name Tex Ritter.
Roy Rogers, Tex Ritter. Tex Ritter. Oh, well, that's when I woke up. Oh, what a beautiful song.
At the end of this record, he just says, you know, one of the greatest things in life has been the friends you meet as you go along through life. Now, it's a lovely double album. Bye-bye. All the best.
Well, only one breakdown tonight.
Only one.
Yes. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Film collectors are all nutters. Some have got more fruit in them and some have got more nut in them. David Gillespie, copyright Gillespie Productions. Yes, I said that to somebody once when they said, "Oh, that's a nice thing. I'm going to use that." I said, "No, that's World Copyright Gillespie Productions Incorporated."
I met her working in a little store. Her manner and her dress were very plain. We talked a while and then we talked some more. We both agreed that we should meet again. But you ought to see Sally on Sunday. One day her dreams come true.